consecutive annual Confederate Decoration Day recognition. And I do welcome all of y'all here. I'd like to begin with a reading from Edward Ward Carmack, 1858 to 1908. The South is a land that has known sorrows. It is a land that has broken the ashen crust and moistened it with tears. A land scarred and riven by the plowshare of war and billowed with the graves of her dead. But a land of legend, a land of song, a land of hallowed and heroic memories. To that land, every drop of my blood, every fiber of my being, every pulsation of my heart is consecrated forever. I was born of her womb. I was nurtured at her breast. And when my last hour shall come, I pray God that I may be pillowed upon her bosom and rocked to sleep within her tender and encircling arms. He said this before the U.S. House of Representatives on the 22nd of April, 1898. I only hope that even in our day-to-day lives that we lead here in the South and in Ripley and elsewhere, that we can hold our head as high as he did on the floor of the House of Representatives. And we should never feel any shame about who we are and what God made us and who he made us to be. So once again, welcome. Do we have any elected or government-appointed officials here with us today? Okay. With that being said, do we have any civic leaders of any civic groups that are not going to bring greetings today that are out in the audience? Okay. Raymond Settle, compatriot Raymond Settle, would you come forward, please? He is going to share with us the governor's proclamation that was rendered for this year's observance of Confederate Memorial Day and Heritage Month.
The State of Mississippi, Office of the Governor, a proclamation. Whereas April is the month in which Confederate states began and ended a 4-year struggle, and whereas the Confederate Memorial Day re-recognized those who served in the Confederacy. Whereas April the 29th, 2013 is set aside as Confederate Memorial Day to honor those who served in the Confederacy. And whereas it is important for all Americans to reflect upon our nation's past, to gain insight from our mistakes and successes, and to come to a full understanding that the lessons learned yesterday and today will carry us through tomorrow if we carefully and earnestly strive to understand and appreciate our heritage and our opportunities which lie before us. Now, therefore, I, Phil Bryant, Governor of the State of Mississippi, hereby proclaim the month of April 2013 as Confederate Heritage Month in the State of Mississippi. Signed, Phil Bryant, Governor.
Thank you, compatriot Settle. I was recently at Beauvoir, the last home of President Davis, over the weekend for its Memorial Day service, and a man said something to me. There was a passionate debate going on, and I could tell. I said, I know you're very sincere about what you believe. And he said, you don't know how sincere I am. He said, when I was a little boy, I remember my granddaddy telling me about his daddy's service in the war between the states. You're only talking about a couple of generations, folks. And he said, I will never forget what he told me and what he said. So they're speaking to us if we only listen. Do we have our chaplain here for the invocation? Compatriot and camp chaplain Randall Hancock.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see everybody here. And it's good to see people that are here for the same reason, the things we believe in. If you'd stand, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you, Lord, and we thank you for this day. Thank you for the beautiful weather we've got in the congregation we have here today. We ask, God, that you bless each one of us, keep us and guide us and show us the way, Lord. And Lord, never let us forget why we're here. We ask, Lord, that you bless our speaker today. Touch each and every one here, Lord. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. If you remain standing or stand. Second Lieutenant Commander Larry Lamberth will lead us in the pledges and the salutes to the colors.
We're going to do the Pledge of the United States flag, please, first. Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the Mississippi flag. I salute the Mississippi flag and the sovereign state for which it stands, with pride in her history and achievements, and with her confidence in her future under the guidance of Almighty God. And our Confederate flag. I salute the Confederate flag with affection, reverence, undying devotion to the cause for which it stands. Thank you.
You may be seated. Thank you. We'll have some dignitaries from various organizations that will be bringing greetings on this important day. First, we have our First Lieutenant Commander from the Tippah Tigers, Camp 868, Sons of Confederate Veterans, Bill Baker.
Thank you, Dr. Cummins, and all our honored guests. On behalf of the Tippah Tigers, Camp 868, and our commander, Marty Hubbard, I thank all of you for coming to our Confederate Heritage Day celebration. Tippah Tigers Camp has had an outstanding year. I want to share just a few words about some of our 94 members. Our membership includes doctors, lawyers, farmers, authors, truck drivers, electricians, carpenters, salesmen, musicians, actually people from all walks of life. In that respect, we are no different than our ancestors whom we are honoring here today. They left their homes, and their families, and their occupations, and took up arms against an unjust and overwhelming force. They went through some of the worst living conditions that are imaginable. My great-grandfather was captured at the Battle of Stones River in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He was imprisoned at Camp Douglas in Chicago, Illinois. He was forced to endure one of the coldest winters of the war with hardly any clothing, inadequate shelter, and lucky to even get a blanket. Many of our ancestors paid the ultimate price of giving their very lives because they loved their country. We're not asked yet to give up our lives, but we are asked to live and honor that great generation who gave so much. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much, Bill. And I just echo what he just said. We just come from such a wide variety of backgrounds within our organization. It is a perfect reflection of our Confederate ancestors and the government of the Confederacy. Next, we'd like to have Brigade Commander Buddy Ellis, who is the 2nd Brigade Commander for the Mississippi Division, Sons of Confederate Veterans.
I'd like to thank y'all for coming out for Confederate Memorial Day.
And thank y'all for letting me be y'all's brigade commander for the last 4 years. And it's been real good working with y'all's camp. Y'all got a very good camp here, and thank y'all for letting me serve y'all. We're here today to honor our Confederate ancestors, and glad to see the good crowd we got here to do that. We also need to honor our Confederate ancestors every day, not just on Confederate Memorial Day, but we need to do something every day to honor them. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Commander Ellis. And for those that don't know, Commander Ellis was the spearhead of where we will soon have a Mississippi monument at Shiloh, and I think we owe him a round of applause on that. Also mentioned in the crowd, lurking in the back, is our Sergeant Major. He's my Sergeant Major in the first, it's Company G. How do you say it, Steve? First Mississippi Company G, Mechanized Cavalry, Sons of Confederate Veterans. And those that aren't aware of the Mechanized Cavalry and what all it does, see Stephen about that, and he will inform you about it. But it is one of the workhorse or parts of our Sons of Confederate Veterans. Thank you for being here. Next we have Commander Larry Jolly, who represents Lieutenant General Nathan Bedford Forrest, Chapter 100, Military Order of Stars and Bars.
Thank you, Dr. Cummings, and good afternoon. I'm pleased to bring greetings from the Lieutenant General Nathan Bedford Forrest, Chapter 100 of the Military Order of Stars and Bars. And that's a mouthful. We're descendants of the Confederate Officer Corps and the Confederate government officials. Most of us are also descendants of privates, and we're equally proud of both. If you qualify for MOS and be from a lineal or collateral ancestor, we'd love to talk to you about membership. So just see any of our members. It's only fitting and proper that we set aside a special holiday to honor the memory of these heroes. I want to commend the UDC, the SCV, and all other Southern Heritage groups here in Ripley for the great work that you do. Thank you for your service. At a point in the American Revolution, when the war was not going good for the Americans, Patriot Thomas Paine wrote these words: "These are the times that try men's souls." Well, fast forward to the 1860 decade, Paine's words will still ring familiar to our Confederate ancestors. They definitely lived in trying times. Another quote from Thomas Paine: "Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered." I expect this thought was on the minds of our Confederate ancestors as they were imprisoned, starved, abused, and mistreated by an invading army. Our struggle in this century is a political one. Our challenge is to protect our memorials, our history, and our culture. Our ancestors rebuilt from the ashes that they came home to in a devastated land. They built a great place for us to live, and we want to keep it that way. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Commander Jolly. Next we have with us Mrs. Joanne Yale, who is the president of the General M.P. Lowry, Chapter 1608, United Daughters of the Confederacy.
Thank you, Dr. Cummings. Good evening. I bring you greetings from the General M.P. Lowry, Chapter 1608 of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. We join you here to remember those valiant soldiers who fought for states' rights. Honoring our Confederate veterans is one of the reasons that from 1907 to 1911, the Tippah County United Daughters of the Confederacy worked tirelessly to raise money to erect the Confederate monument that stands here today. 100 years later, the Tippah Tigers camp of the Sons of Confederate Veterans worked to have the monument cleaned and restored. The inscription on the monument reads, "In memory of the Confederate soldiers of Tippah County, our heroic dead and the chivalrous living who wore the gray." Those soldiers have all passed now, but we shall continue to honor their memory with observances such as you are holding here today. Thank you.
Thank you, President Yale. Next, she is followed by Miss Isabella Cummins, President of the Sarah Holmes Lowry Chapter 32, Children of the Confederacy.
Thank you, Daddy. On behalf of the Mithras Sarah Holmes Lowry, Chapter 32, Children of the Confederacy of the UDC of Blue Mountain, Mississippi, I would like to bring greetings to you all. The children of the Confederacy are happy to be a part of this very special occasion. We are proud of our ancestors. You should be too. We are your posterity and future. We need members. Please support us. God bless you all.
Thank you, Isabella. She is followed by Mrs. Mavis Clemmer of the Chickasaw Nation Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution.
Thank you, Dr. Cummings. On behalf of the Daughters of the American Revolution, I bring you greetings. American Revolution had trying times and so forth, but they survived. They got us the freedom from England that we so enjoy now. I'm a registrar for the Chickasaw Nation Chapter DAR, and I'm also looking for applicants to join our society. We have several in the county, and would be happy to have some more. On behalf of the DAR, Chickasaw Nation Chapter, I salute each and every one of you. And may God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mavis. You know, some people may question why we have sons and daughters of the American Revolution here, but the more you learn the history and study that, we were just continuing what happened then. The only difference is we lost. I mean, if you go to the history, the ideals, the principles, they're all there. And I think it's very apropos that we have them with us, and I'm very proud to have them here. Did Mr. Gray make it? Larry? No? Okay. I guess he sends his regrets. Who's Roy Gray of the William Gray Chapter, Sons of the American Revolution. Mr. Jolly is a member of the SAR. I know Mark Evans is. I know if you have any questions about the Sons of the American Revolution, feel free to ask these men. I'm sure they'll help you in that regard. At this point, we will welcome and hopefully give a really good Tippah County welcome to our guest speaker today, who is an SCV member and along with his brother, Ronnie, a nationally proclaimed authors. We have with us today Mr. Walter D. Donnie Kennedy.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to come back home to Mississippi, and although I am the past commander of the Louisiana Division Sons of Confederate Veterans, all my Confederate ancestors were from Mississippi, every one of them, and I'm quite proud of that fact. I've been a citizen of the sovereign state of Louisiana for about 38 years now, but I grew up in Mississippi, and this is home, so I'm glad to be back home. We're at a memorial service, but who is really the beneficiary of this memorial service? The Confederate soldiers are dead. They're gone. They're in a far better place than even we are today, and this is a beautiful place to be. But the real intent of a memorial service is to honor those who have gone on, those who have dedicated themselves to a higher cause than the average person that we see today. So in actuality, who is really going to benefit from this service today? It is not the stone statue or the cold dead. It is we who are alive today, because we are going to learn something about who they were so that we can become better people ourselves. Actually, a memorial service really is a memory exercise. You remember in the Bible, when the children of Israel, before they were led out of Egyptian bondage, they had the first Passover service. And the first Passover service had a supper, as we Southerners always love to do anyway. And that meal was a memorial service. It was to establish a long line of memory so that they would always remember from where they had come, how God in His benevolent love and grace had removed them from the bondage and tyranny of Egypt into the promised land of the Lord. As a child growing up in Mississippi in Tippah County, I remember in that little old wood frame Baptist church there, that every Sunday sitting there on the communion table, the words inscribed on that table, "Do this in remembrance of me." You see, memory, history is very important. It is, I would say, divinely important. True history is a necessity if we are going to do those things which God has commanded us to do. Truth must be known. But today, Southern history is not what we know to be truth. Today, we have politically correct history. In that history, the South is always seen as an evil place, full of wicked people bent upon whipping, beating, and destroying the liberty and lives of the downtrodden. That is what I call the PC history that is being taught too often today in school. Most of the true, real history of the South is being dropped into the proverbial Orwellian memory hole. If any of y'all ever read the book by George Orwell, 1984, you remember there was a whole room full of clerks and librarians that did nothing but search the literature and history to find any passage that would cause trouble for Big Brother, and to rip it out of the books and drop it into what they call the Orwellian memory hole, which was just a flue that sent things down to the furnace. In other words, anything that would cause problem for the ruling elite, for the victors, that had to be destroyed. That is what is happening to our history. But we're here to celebrate our ancestors. And remember, this is a celebration. This is not a worship service. We're not pagans. We don't worship our ancestors. We understand that they, like us, are sinful human beings. We make mistakes. They make mistakes. What we're here to study their lives and to glean from their lives those truths that we know that will help us to be better citizens. We seek to learn from their lives. You know, I often tell people that if you don't have the truth of history, you're eternally lost. I drove from Monroe, Louisiana this morning. I left. That's 300, in case anyone's interested in walking, that's 342 miles from here to there. I had to remember, I had to have a memory of where I was to know where I am going. But I could not know where I was if I didn't know what was behind me. When I got to Vicksburg, I better know, well, that river is behind me, so I'm headed to Jackson. If I did not have a history of where I had been, I would have headed off to Meridian, been in Tuscaloosa right now. And who'd want to be around those crazy people, them Alabamians? You see, I'm going to hear from some Alabama friends. Oh, I know that's coming. But the fact is, you have to know where you have been in order to know where you are and to plan on where you are going. 1 year after the defeat of the South, Lord Acton, a famous British politician and jurist and a friend of Robert E. Lee, asked General Lee, they wrote letters across the Atlantic, and Lord Acton asked General Lee, said, General Lee, with the new government in America today, with everything that's happened in America, what is America going to be like? General Robert E. Lee wrote back to Lord Acton and said, I fear for my country when all the rights, states' rights, when all the rights and privileges which once belonged to we the people of the local states, when all those rights and powers are centralized in one big central government in Washington, D.C., General Lee told Lord Acton, America at that time would become aggressive abroad and despotic at home. You see, General Lee understood what America was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a nation where we, the people, rule the government. The government does not rule us. It was very appropriate that the lady from the SAR is talking to us, the ladies of the American Revolution, because, after all, what were our Confederate forefathers fighting for in 1861 but the same principles that 81, 82, 85 years earlier their grandparents had fought for? You see, states' rights, as Robert E. Lee pointed out to Lord Acton, states' rights was that means whereby we, the people at the local level, force the federal government to abide by the Constitution. That is the means whereby we made sure that the federal government was our servant and not our master. You see, in 1776, our colonial forefathers established a government where we, the people, had the right to alter or abolish any government that did not meet our desires. Now, that's very radical. Most people say, you mean you believe that American government can be destroyed? Well, let's go read the Declaration of Independence. I'm sure most of the people here have read the Declaration of Independence, and you'll notice that our forefathers, both Northerners and Southerners, declared that the only legitimate government is that government which exists by the consent, the free and unfettered consent of the governed. In other words, our forefathers, both Northerners and Southerners, at one time believed that government existed to serve the people. People don't exist to serve the government. Gosh, how things have changed in 200-something years. And it's interesting to note that our forefathers noted, especially when they adopted the Constitution, where does this consent of government come from? It comes from the people, but not the American people in one gigantic mass. It comes from the people of the sovereign states. States' rights was integral to the development and creation of these United States of America. And in the beginning, that belief was as firmly held by the Yankees as it was by Southerners. That was an American concept, not a Southern concept. It was an American idea that we, the people, should rule the government and not the government rule us. And it was the states that created this government. Now, you can clearly see that. Anybody doubts that, go pick up your Constitution, go to Article 7, and you'll see who created the federal government. It was we, the people of the sovereign states. Therefore, when your great-great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, when they voted in Mississippi to come out of this union, they were merely doing what their forefathers 85 years earlier had done. Patrick Henry said it very well. You remember Patrick Henry. I think it was in 1775, he gave his great speech. It may have been 76. But anyway, he gave his speech, "Give me liberty or give me death." Patrick Henry rallied the whole of the 13 colonies with that address because he put it out in public for everybody to understand that this place called America, the people of those states believed that liberty always trumps government. Liberty was the very essence of what America was to be about. When the Constitution was being debated on to be ratified, about 12 years later, Patrick Henry renewed his belief in liberty when he said, the first thing I have at heart is American liberty. Liberty. The second thing is American union. Interesting. At about the same time, another Virginian, you may have heard of him, James Madison, he's also known as the father of the Constitution. James Madison in Federalist Paper 43, I believe, made note that all governmental institutions must be sacrificed for the safety and happiness of society. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, is telling us that government must be done away with if society does not feel secure and happy. Because you see, society, liberty, the freedom of those people trumps government every time. Patrick Henry believed that. James Madison believed that. Unfortunately, Abraham Lincoln didn't get that memo, or if he did, he chose to ignore it. For you see, Lincoln said the Union was the greatest thing in the world. It didn't matter if you trampled upon the Constitution, as long as you saved the Union. Because for Abraham Lincoln, government was the most important thing in America. That's the great change in America from our founding fathers to today. It is government that is most important. If you don't believe me, don't pay your taxes in next April 15th, and you'll see who's the most important in this country. You exist merely as tax slaves of the government. Here's how one old Southerner said that his father, who was a Confederate soldier, his feelings for the South. He said, quote, "My father was wrapped heart and soul in the South. Out of 6 brothers who rode to war, 1 died at Shiloh, 2 died at Vicksburg, 1 died at Rock Island, 1 was shot at Gettysburg. And the youngest, my father, came out of the struggle with an arm gone." Not a bad argument for one family to put up in support of their convictions. Father was just simply a Southern soldier fighting for a principle. That's what he asked to be carved on his grave. Fighting for a principle. Now, of course, when we say that, all of our PC haters of the South will say, oh yes, he was fighting for the principle to own slaves. But isn't that strange? Isn't that strange? Only 6 to 8% of Southerners held a title to a slave in 1861. Hold a title to a slave. Only about 20% of the Confederate soldiers were men who came from a home where their father held title to a slave. So that means 80%, at least 80% of the Confederate soldiers had no interest in slaves per se. You mean my ancestors were so stupid and so dumb as to go off and fight and die and struggle just so some rich plantation owner in the Delta can sit on his veranda and watch the darkies pick cotton? That's not logical, people. That doesn't make sense. We know that is not the case. They fought, all of them fought for a principle, the principle of self-government, the right where we, the people, do not stand in fear of the government, but the government stands in fear of us. Wouldn't it be nice if the politicians and bureaucrats and judges in Washington, D.C. woke up tomorrow morning and said, oh my God, what are the people going to do to me today because I've done something wrong that they don't like? Don't hold your breath for that happening, folks, but wouldn't that be nice? But instead, we worry about what in the world they're going to do to us next. Now, you know that's true. Don't look at me and stare and think, oh, that ain't true. You know it's true. That's what we all worry about. You see, our Confederate forefathers understood the real meaning of states' rights and why it was so important to have a barrier between we, the people, and that federal government up there. We had to have the tools to force the federal government to act appropriately or else. Now, when I tell people that from the North, often I get this answer, oh yeah, that's not what the war was about. Well, if you don't believe me, will you believe a Yankee? In about 1870, right a few years after the war, a Yankee colonel, Robert Ingersoll, who was a radical abolitionist, a radical Republican, and a free thinker, we call those people secular humanists today, he let the cat out of the bag about what the war was all about. He said, quote, "The great struggle, the great obstruction in Lincoln's way, and the great stumbling block in Lincoln's way, and in the way of thousands, was the old doctrine of states' rights." You see, that Yankee fully understood what the war was about. Not slavery. Yes, slavery has a lot to do with Southern history and American history. I often like to go up north when I'm visiting up there, and I'll ask people a question. I said, look, I've got 3 states here, Massachusetts, Illinois, and Oregon, and they're northern states, and I've got 3 states, South Carolina, Mississippi, and Texas. I want to ask you a couple of questions. Out of those 6 states, which state was the first state to legalize slavery? All right. Which state was the first state to start the African slave trade? And which state was the first state to segregate school children by race, separate white here, black here? And you'll be surprised, Mississippians, how many times y'all win that contest, hands down. Interesting, isn't it? And I love it when y'all do, because then I can tell them, say, you're so foolish, it's ridiculous. Massachusetts, 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 period. All 3 questions are answered Massachusetts, not Mississippi. It was the North, not the South. You see, there's much more to this struggle than just what you think it is. Interesting enough, there was quite a few people who did not like that stumbling block of states' rights. Karl Marx's co-author of modern-day communism, Friedrich Engels, noted that the only way to build a communist state, and he was talking about Europe, but he was speaking to an American at this time, was to get rid of the small republics and their little sovereignty and put them into one big, united, indivisible government. He said, once we do that, we will have cleared the battleground and prepared the battleground and cleared the way for communism. Now, how do you prepare the way for communism? Get rid of states' rights, is what he was saying. Now, interestingly enough, he was saying that to Joseph Wiedemeyer. Joseph Wiedemeyer was a fellow communist with Marx and Engels, who was in the United States at that time peddling copies of the Communist Manifesto. Later on, he joined the Republican Party while still being a communist and helped Lincoln get nominated by the Republican Party and helped Lincoln get elected president. And then he served as a general in the Union Army fighting against, guess what? States' rights. Isn't that ridiculous? If you don't believe me, get that wonderful little book called Lincoln's Marxists. I think one of them Kennedy brothers wrote it, but it's a great book. It covers that subject. You see, PC pundits will tell you that your Confederate ancestors were horrible people. Not only for slavery, but they were wicked secessionists. They wanted to destroy America. Every time I hear that, I want to laugh, because every 4th of July, we are celebrating America's great secession holiday. How did we win? Our first step to win our independence from Great Britain was severing that union between those individual colonies and the mother country in Great Britain. It was by an act of secession that these United States was even created. Thomas Jefferson, the virtual author of the Declaration of Independence, and James Madison, the father of the Constitution, in their Kentucky and Virginia resolves in 1798, noted that states were sovereign and that states were the only ones that could judge if the federal government was acting appropriately, and if the federal government was not acting appropriately, it was the people of the states who had every right to use whatever measure necessary to correct the evil, including, guess what, secession. Now, was James Madison and Thomas Jefferson un-American? I think not. In 1825, a textbook was written. One of the first textbooks on the U.S. Constitution was written by William Rawle. William Rawle was a Yankee. He was an abolitionist. He was one of those abolitionists that worked with Southerners and not against Southerners to end slavery. He was a friend of Washington and Franklin. Yet his textbook, which was used at West Point Military Academy, has one whole chapter on how a state would legally go about seceding from the Union. Now, was this friend of Jefferson, the friend of Washington and Franklin, was he un-American? I don't think so. Washington didn't think so. And neither did the people of Massachusetts. 1 year after that book was published, it was reviewed by the North American Review out of Boston, Massachusetts. Now, one whole chapter is talking about the right of secession. Do you know in that review, which covers about 5 or 6 pages, not one negative word is spoken of about secession? As a matter of fact, the editor said that Mr. Rawls' book was a, quote, safe and intelligent guide for understanding the Constitution. You see, as I said, early in American history, states' rights, real states' rights, was an American concept. It was not something that was just Southern in nature. 20 years after Appomattox, General Joe Shelby stated, quote, we fail, but we have the satisfaction of knowing that no people on earth endured or fought more from patriotic desires. We were overcome by the hirelings of the world who were ignorant of our people, devoid of honor and patriotic duty. As we all surrendered, it behooves us to abide by the terms imposed. Nobody cares that slavery is destroyed. It was not the loss of slavery we so much objected to, but the manner of its abolition. The war has demonstrated that the Constitution amounts to naught. After all, what matters the most is masked bayonets, end quote. Now, boy, that should strike you right in the heart. Because what he's saying is that no matter what the Constitution says, if the federal government, who has more troops than anybody else, if they decide to impose their will upon the people, they can do it. And many times I've told people, yes, we have been reunited, but we were reunited at the point of a bloody bayonet. Ladies and gentlemen, bloody bayonets are the instruments of tyrants. It's the last recourse, the last argument used by every tyrant, whether that be an Adolf Hitler, a Joseph Stalin, a Fidel Castro, or an Abraham Lincoln. It's still the same story. Bloody bayonets are the instruments of tyrants to force people to do what they do not want to do. In June of 1891, down in Jackson, Mississippi, a Confederate monument was memorialized and dedicated. It was at that dedication, it was that monument that Representative John F. Harris, a black representative from Washington County, spoke so eloquently in favor of raising that monument. Here's what Representative Harris, a black representative in the Mississippi legislature, had to say, quote, I too wore the gray, the same color my master wore, and if that war had gone on till now, I would have been there yet. I want it known to all the world that my vote is given in favor of the bill to erect a monument in honor of the Confederate dead, end quote. Following Representative Harris's lead, every black representative in the legislature voted for the erection of the Confederate monument. Get them to do that today. They don't know their history. Don't blame them. They don't know their history. On that bleak day, on that day in June when that monument was dedicated, the invocation was given by Reverend Father A.H. Pritchard, who said in part, quote, Thou, O Lord, who wert falsely charged as being a traitor to thy country, and didst unjustly suffer a cruel death, thou at least wilt sympathize with us in our lost cause, and we pray thee to vindicate and to guard the memory of our comrades who, likewise wrongfully accused and condemned, willingly, cheerfully lay down their lives on the consecrated altar of patriotism and liberty. End quote. End quote. That prayer that was sent out over 122 years ago is still relevant for us to hear today, because note, that one of the things that minister said that our ancestors was fighting for was patriotism and liberty. Ladies and gentlemen, can we do less in this age than they did? Certainly not. In 1780, another war was going on. It was the war of the War for American Independence. It was a low time in that war because all the colonial armies, standing armies, had been defeated. Charleston had been reduced. It was the British was running ransack through the low countries of the Carolinas and Georgia. And all of a sudden, Colonel Ferguson and his raiders went into the upcountry of the Carolinas to subdue those rebels, as they were called. Well, when those rebels heard about that, they started pouring out of the hills from Georgia, from South Carolina, North Carolina, from over into what would later become Tennessee, and even some from Virginia. And they met Ferguson at a little place called Kings Mountain. It's now in North Carolina. At that time, it was Kings Mountain, South Carolina. Those men with their unregistered firearms, assault rifles, they had no leader from Washington or Philadelphia. They just got together. Militia got together. Men with weapons who were determined to remain free, who in the face of a foe many, many times more powerful than themselves, fought the British at the Battle of Kings Mountain and totally annihilated the British force. At the end of that battle, the people in the community had no idea who won. You could tell the battle was over because it went quiet. They knew somebody had won. Then all of a sudden, from the top of Kings Mountain, they heard the cry, "Hooray for liberty! Hooray for liberty!" That was Southerners who did that. It was from that point that Calpins, Guilford Courthouse, and finally Yorktown took place. That was the beginning of the end of the British. And it was our ancestors who would not submit to British tyranny. The tyranny of the redcoat they would not submit to. 80 years later, their grandchildren started enlisting in Confederate units to fight the Bluecoats this time. On their battle flag, they had a motto, their Confederate battle flag. And on that battle flag, the motto simply stated, "Like our ancestors, we will be free." Ladies and gentlemen, that is what this man and his compatriots fought for. That is what your Confederate forefathers fought for liberty, for freedom, for the right of government by the consent of the governed. Will we one day be able to say, like our ancestors, we will be free? That is the question that is before us today. If we have a real, true understanding of our history, if our memory does not fail us, if we do not allow the PC police of memory and history to destroy it from our lives, we will yet be able to join the chorus of those men at King Mountain and declare, "Hurrah for liberty! Hurrah for liberty!" God bless you all, and God save the South. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donnie. I know we were all edified, and I know we must be fired up after that great talk. Just don't even know what to say after that. My mind is reeling from all that he said. It's just, and it echoes what Buddy Ellis said too. Every day we should be doing something to honor our ancestors. But for not just for them, but like you said, for us today and for our posterity and our future. And you know, that may be as simple as a yes ma'am or a no ma'am. Something to think about. Opening a door for someone, exercising an act of chivalry for the men. Things that are dying in this day and age. At this time, we will have the placement of our wreath by our SCV compatriots and any children of the Confederacy and or cadets that are present.